Okay, we're live.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وأتباعه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Assalamu alaikum. We're reading from the ninth word, the second point, page 52 if you're following online. And just to recap the verse that the ninth word is examining or trying to understand is from chapter 30, Surah Al-Rum, verse 17 and 18, and to recite it and to translate, I can do that. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون. So glory be unto God when you reach the evening or night, and when you reach the morning, and to Him belongs the praise, all praise, in the heavens and the earth, and at night, and when you are at noon. So that is the verse that's being studied here, and the ninth word is about regarding the prescribed prayers, the 5 daily prayers. And the first point, addressing it from the perspective of what glorification means, and what exaltation means, and what praise means for man towards his creator, and how they are, as he says, the seeds of the prayers, or what essentially is the kernel of truth in those prayers, why they are so important. And the reason being is that they are the essence of man's relationship with his creator, to glorify his names or his qualities, and saying that therefore he must be great. His names are his qualities, and his essence be perfect, and therefore by doing so you are praising him by your heart, tongue, and body. So all aspects, all faculties of man, because that is what you see and experience in this world, and you are simply just acknowledging that. And that's what prayer is. It's a acknowledgement to the self, more so than anything else. And why hence they're repeated so often throughout the day in every prayer, and also after the prayer, as he mentioned. And therefore they are essentially, as he says, concise summaries throughout the day, at each prescribed time, concise summaries of what one experiences or feels throughout the day. Second point is what we're reading from today, so I'll start with that. The meaning of worship is this: that the servant sees his own faults, impotence, and poverty, and in the divine court prostrates in love and wonderment before dominical perfection, divine mercy, and the power of the Eternally Besought One. The meaning of worship is this: that the servant sees his own faults, impotence, and poverty, and in the divine court prostrates in love and wonderment before dominical perfection, divine mercy, and the power of the Eternally Besought One. That is to say, just as the sovereignty of dominicality demands worship and obedience, so also does the holiness of dominicality require that the servant sees his faults through seeking forgiveness, and through his glorifications and declaring glory be to God, proclaims that his sustainer is pure and free of all defects, and exalted above and far from the false ideas of the people of misguidance, and hallowed and exempt from all the faults in the universe. Also, the perfect power of dominicality requires that through understanding his own weakness and the impotence of other creatures, the perfect power of dominicality requires that through understanding his own weakness and the impotence of other creatures, the servant proclaims God is most great in admiration and wonder before the majesty of the works of the eternally besought one's power, and bowing in deep humility seeks refuge in him and places his trust in him. Also, the infinite treasury of dominicality's mercy requires that the servant makes known his own need and the needs and poverty of all creatures through the tongue of entreaty and supplication. The infinite treasury of dominicality's mercy requires that the servant makes known his own need and the needs and poverty of all creatures through the tongue of entreaty and supplication, and proclaims his sustainers' bounties and gifts through thanks and laudation, and uttering, all praise be to God. That is to say, the words and actions of the prayers comprise these meanings and have been laid down from the side of divinity. So we can stop here for briefly and talk about the second point. I can just share my initial thoughts and like to hear what others would have to say. But in the second point, what he's describing prayer, or in other words, this form of worship as being, it's a self-reflection, or self-reflection and reflection on creation in general, as he'll later show. With regards to the self, as he says, it's about recognizing one's own faults, impotence, and poverty. In other words, man can't sustain himself. He can't sustain his qualities. He can't answer to his needs. And this form of worship, prayer, the prescribed prayers, is a recognition of that to the self. And when prostrating, he does so recognizing and admitting and affirming that that he's in need of the divine source and his infinite treasury, that he, out of his own love towards his creation, provides, and that out of his own mercy provides, and that out of his own power provides. And in a way, it's a two-way relationship, in the sense that because the one you're prostrating to or asking from, and recognizing, is divine or absolute or eternally besought, as he says, beyond the nature of the universe, beyond space and time, beyond the limitations of man or anything else in this world. You are in other words, absolute, the divine. In a sense, all things look to him. So worship is necessary towards him, because all things necessarily look towards him. They are all in need of him, because he must be sovereign and he must have dominion over all things. That's why, in a sense, sovereignty of dominicality demands worship and obedience, because all things are in need of him. And in doing so, by recognizing this, this also therefore requires that you see your own impotence and poverty and faults at the same time, to seek forgiveness, and then therefore declare glory be to God, and that which in other words signifies you are free of all defects, you are free of all wants, and therefore only you can answer to my needs or hopes or aspirations and wants. Um, so this is what I took from the first paragraph. I don't know if anybody has any personal thoughts on that. Aishanur wrote, worship equals a process of self-realization that signposts to realization of one who must be absolute in compassion, perfection, and power. Yeah. But you can speak if you want to.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. Yeah, in addition to what I wrote about worship being this, because it's saying very explicitly the meaning of worship is this, and then it's talking about all these different steps that one goes through. So it seems like this process of looking into oneself, ruminating upon one's own reality, right? And through that rumination, being guided towards the necessity of one who is absolute in all the ways that one can't be, that I can't be, right? In compassion, in perfection, in power. And that all of this essentially seems to be tied to, when examining one's human qualities, to human emotion. Because I could easily, look at my own faults. And I think it's very much human tendency to do so, right? Especially when we perhaps compare ourselves to other people, we can say, I'm not as intelligent as this person, or I'm not as, good at this particular thing as this person. And that can lead to a sense of despair or impotence and poverty. But that comparison can only be made complete when you realize that, everything of the nature of this universe also shares the same reality that I do, whether I realize it in all its aspects or not. But that, me realizing my own existential poverty, my own existential impotence, and the many faults and shortcomings I have is not supposed to, it doesn't say here that it leads to a sense of despair or a sense of, self-disparagement, but rather, I found interesting that it says, the servant, the abd, right, sees one's own faults, and in the divine court prostrates in love and wonderment. So I guess I'm also wondering, let me pose a question here. How does one go from that state of realizing how do I go from realizing all my shortcomings to a state of love and wonderment? There seems like there should be something to fill in that step there, because it can seem like a little bit of a jump too. So yeah, I'll just pose that. Thank you.
I remember gave a thumbs up. It's interesting question. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, but my just sort of initial thought is that there's a sort of implicit. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Alimar, if you wanted to speak. The floor is yours. You have your hand in it.
Now, I understand, but you complete your comment, please. I would like to hear your comment first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there, at least with this word, he's, I think, acknowledging that you recognize that there is a divine source. That you've already come to that conclusion, and you've come to that conclusion, and then prayer or this form of worship is the means of how you connect with him. So that was my initial thought to Aishanor's question, but go ahead.
No, thank you also, Aishanur. I realized that Aisha Nur, when she was speaking, she's aware that the text is saying two things in a parallel sense. As the translation says, which doesn't sound really perfect, but that's okay. The servant, the person, the one whose position is not to be able to sustain himself. That is what the nature of human being sees his faults. I would say his, yes, wrong choices, shortcomings. Maybe the word fault has also this meaning. I would say shortcomings. Shortcomings for what? For his expectations, whatever he expects from his own nature. So he says, look, I am choosing sometimes the wrong options. I know I know that my choices goes against my nature and makes me feel hurting, pain, that I've done something wrong, etc. Depending on the person's sensitivity of his own realization, self-realization. But to a certain extent, most of the people realize what he is doing is right or wrong, although this person may confesses or may confess it or may not confess it. That's up to him. But everybody knows that. I know that when I did something wrong, I know that I've done something wrong. How I come to the realization of the faults in the universe, as the text says, I would say again, not the faults in the universe, the translation problem. In fact, in the original text, it's clear. Shortcomings in the universe. Shortcomings for what? In order to reply, in order to answer the expectations of human beings. Now, I've done something wrong. I have, for example, hurt somebody. I turn to the universe. I've done something wrong. Universe responds nothing. It says nothing. And that's it. I mean, if I'm not caught by the police, I am still free going around. But my conscience constantly reminds me that I am doing something wrong. I have done something wrong, and it is not fair. For example, I have stolen somebody's property, and this person is not able to retrieve his property, get his property back. So I say, okay, I've done something wrong, but I need to be, uh, uh, if you like, punished for it, or for human expectations, I want something to be fulfilled for me, and I turn to the universe. In both cases, universe is dumb, doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything, doesn't respond, but only shows that its source of existence must be a divine being. I am just shortcutting here. Must be a divine being. It means nothing to do with me, but something which gives me existence. So now what happened? Two shortcomings come together. And then human beings said, look, I cannot really fulfill what I want, even asking for forgiveness. I cannot forgive myself. My conscience is constantly disturbing me. I have done something wrong. I have done something wrong. Let's make a clear case. For example, God forbid, somebody, let's say, killed another person, not on the right, just reason. So the man is dead. He cannot bring it back, the murderer. He cannot bring him the dead person into life. What shall he do? His conscience constantly disturbs him, and he needs to be forgiven. But who is going to forgive? The murderer's own conscience doesn't forgive. The universe doesn't respond at all in any way. It also has its own shortcomings because he is bound to follow the order. He cannot get out of the order, whatever it is. And it is just like me. He is bound to do whatever its nature is. It means however it is created, it has to act. So the man is in desperate situation. How am I going to find a way to be forgiven? Or from another perspective, how am I going to find a way to fulfill my expectations? Human expectations, very natural human demands, expectations. So he has to turn to a divine source. It means, oh, the one who created my conscience, me and my conscience, or the one who created the universe. We are here hopeless, helpless, but we want to solve the problem. It is within us. Since you created this need for the solution, you must respond to me. That is how the human beings realizes that he has to glorify the creator. He has to hallow the creator, exalt the creator of the universe in order to be able to seek refuge with him, without saying that you are above everything, you are the creator of everything, you are the omnipotent, omniscient one, you are the absolute one, you know what I am, what I need. You know what kind of universe you created, what kind of human beings you created. You know that what kind of person I am, but I am in trouble. All this trouble can only be solved through acknowledging you. That is the gist of prayer, asking for forgiveness. What is that? Acknowledging the qualities of the creator of these human needs. Without acknowledging his qualities, asking for forgiveness will be just in a vain action. Why? Please forgive me. So what? For example, I murdered, God forbid. Well, it's a very bad example. I murdered somebody unjustly, and I go to my neighbor, please forgive me. What? I don't know what to do. So I go to his son, his father, whatever, his relatives, please forgive me. Oh, I don't know, you killed that person, not me. So I don't know what to do with you. That is none of my business. He cannot forgive himself. He cannot forget what he has done, what I am done. I cannot forget it. So who can forgive me? Can I go to the mountain and turn to the sky and speak to the stars? I said, stars, please forgive me. Doesn't make sense because they are like me. So it was so interesting to understand that glorification, exaltation, declaring the greatness of the Creator, acknowledging it is a very natural human need because I have endless shortcomings. So does the universe have endless shortcomings, but I need to fulfill my expectations. Every kind of expectations, positive or negative. Positive means to be fulfilled. My expectations need to be fulfilled. Negative is my expectation of being forgiven again is to be fulfilled. Who can forgive me? Only my creator, only the creator of the one I damaged. That was exciting for me from this first paragraph. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments about being conscious of oneself and one's own shortcomings. I don't know if Aisha, you had anything you wanted to add, or anybody else did. Okay. All right. So now I was going to go to the second paragraph. So he says in the second paragraph that perfect power of dominicality requires that through understanding his own weakness and impotence of other creatures, which I think Aisha was alluding to, and Alimur was alluding to, in that no other thing in the universe can answer or respond to this sort of this ingrained or programmed, or whatever word you want to use, human need to seek an answer or seek forgiveness for their own weakness and impotence. No other creature in the universe, all other things are of the same nature, essentially. So therefore, the servant proclaims, God is most great. So rather than things are most great, when, in a sense, when you can say it by the tongue, but also, if you think that, let's say, I mean, this is just something I relate to, but if somebody is sick and they think a doctor or medicine itself is the individual or the thing in and of itself that's answering their need, then in a sense they're declaring that thing is most great for them. Whereas the realization that all things are of the same nature, you realize that, or come to the conclusion, and therefore proclaim, as he says in the previous point, by your tongue, body, God is most great. And that reflects your admiration and wonder regarding how he creates with his absolute power. So you therefore bow in humility, and, as he says, seek refuge or seek aid and seek forgiveness in him, and put your trust in him, because he must be all-knowing and all-wise and all-powerful and all-just. Those are my thoughts on the second paragraph. I don't know if anybody has any of their own thoughts. Go ahead, Asim.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, I mean, to add to whatever the comments are so far. So this is like an extension of the process of realization and calling. So first you start with your own self and see, what the choices that one makes. And then you go around and look for a source, like who can you go and seek forgiveness from, or who can you go and seek assistance from? Who can you go and seek your, whatever you're seeking, your needs from? And now the second now goes into you've seen that there's nothing but the one who sustains the whole universe, who can be the one, the most forgiving one. And this source that you are seeing, you are recognizing, or I'm recognizing, that everything that is in the universe is also shows the signs of his neediness, or they are all within themselves, they are just like me. So I see myself as in a position of the createdness, and I see everything else around me in the same position. us being in weak and in need, and in need of this one that can provide. And that is how, as I would say, as a, how I would organically say that, yeah, God is most great. And basically based on my seeing what is around me, seeing myself by looking at the works of the eternally besought one's power. And with that, if I get that sense of it, that's how my deep humility will go and seek refuge in him. That's how I also understood it. Thank you.
Yeah, in a way, the world is concentric circles of neediness or poverty. You start with yourself, and which is one circle, and you broaden that circle or see another circle around you, which is maybe people you know, family, friends, acquaintances, and it goes broader and broader. Maybe the environment around you, other creatures, um, society, civilization, country. And then you go further and further. Extend out to planets, stars, galaxies, and to the universe. So one circle within another. Um, Anybody else have any other thoughts on the second paragraph?
I liked the comment about how does that take me to gratitude. So I guess like what came to my mind when someone is really sick and they can't move their hands to do anything, like they once they realize that they really are sick, they become very grateful for for anyone around them who is meeting their needs, because if but when they are not sick, for someone to to stop by and say how are you doing, or to someone to offer me something warm to drink, it wouldn't be a big deal. I might not even notice it. But only through this only when we are really connected with that neediness, then we realize how grateful we are that that those needs are met. That's
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and to what Ali Mir was saying earlier, in that if man was perfect, so to speak, if you can even imagine something like that, then what would be the point of prayer? There would be no point. And yeah, so I mean, it's and while it may not seem pleasant or wanted, but man needs those things to be put in those positions, because otherwise his relationship is sort of non-existent between him and his creator. Okay, I was going to go into the third paragraph unless anybody else has any other comments. I don't see anybody's hand up. Okay, no comments in the chat. So the third paragraph, also the infinite treasury of dominicality's mercy requires that the servant makes known his own need and the needs and poverty of all creatures through the tongue of entreaty and supplication. So it's interesting. He says it, and I like when Nursi does this. He does this, in other places as well. In that prayer, in any form of worship, is not just you representing yourself, but in a sense, you represent you and others like you. So potentially all of mankind, depending on your perspective, how much you see the universe in you. So yourself, others around you, other people, other creatures, animate or inanimate, irrelevant, and as near and far one can imagine, because they too are all in need, as he explains in the second paragraph. They are all impoverished. They are all with fault. And so you're not just proclaiming and you're not glorifying and praising and declaring and asking just on your own behalf, but you're asking on behalf of all things in creation, and also thanking him for all that he has provided to not just you, but to everything else, because man isn't independent in the sense that he doesn't exist independently of all other things. He has a relationship with all other things. And it doesn't, irrelevant how much he's aware of it, but it's impossible to separate oneself from anything else in the universe, whether it's people or things that are close to you or far away from you. Doesn't matter. They're all interrelated, because they're all part of the same universe, same creation, given existence at the same time by this eternally besought one, as he says. So, which I think, to just touch on the verse, the second verse, 30:18. وَلَهُ الْحَمْدُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And to him is all the praise in the heavens and the earth. So your recognition of that is to take a position in which you see or you praise not only him on your own behalf, but on all other things' behalf in the heavens and the earth. That's, to me, what the verse says, and I think what he's trying to say as an explanation to that verse. And proclaims his sustainers' bounties and gifts through thanks and laudation, uttering all praise be to God. That is to say, the words and actions of the prayers comprise these meanings and have been laid down from the side of divinity. And it's interesting in that prayer being prescribed from man by a divine and absolute source, in a way, necessitates that prayer be in this way. What I mean to say is that because prayer is from him and praise is sort of from him, these qualities and the ability to be conscious and recognize one's impotence and poverty is from him. And I mean, when I say from him, as in given by him, then in the same sense, because he must be absolute, your prayer therefore also looks to all other things as well, because he's not, or he cannot be indivisible or limited. So too your prayer cannot be, limited, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's, to me, why prayer is in such a way, as he sort of explains here. Anybody have any of their own thoughts or comments?
I like how there's a need to, like you said, connect it to the universe. Because that reminder is something that struck me. Like, why when I proclaim my needs, should I also keep in mind the needs of everyone and everything around me? That was my question as you shared. But then it seems like the answer came in the following sentence, when proclaims his sustainers' bounties and gifts through thanks and laudation. And it occurred to me that the answer may be that when I'm mindful of how my needs and the universe's needs momentarily are being taken care of, so my digestive, like all my blinking systems, my digestive system, my capillary system, my entire universe in my body is working perfectly, that I'm totally unaware of most of the time. And then I look at how the universe is spinning, rotating, seasons, water, everything is happening. Then when I ask for my need, it's more of me noticing how you're already taking care of me, and then the prayer becomes, like Nursey says, an expression of worship, an expression of, I see how you're taking care of me and everyone, and I, instead of a begging and pleading, it becomes more of a comfortable expression of witnessing.
Yeah, I mean, there are many things, one could take into account that one isn't, that we aren't aware of or I'm not aware of. And he doesn't mention the verse here, but, he always frequently talks, about verses in the Quran that, like, ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, to guide us onto the straight path, but always like emphasizing that, always or quite often in the Quran, there is an us or a we, in Arabic, the noon, that's emphasized because there are so many things happening at once within you and beyond you that are all related that you may take for granted, but they're all in need of a divine source. They're all in need of guidance. They're all in need of forgiveness. So, any other thoughts on the second point? Otherwise, I was going to go to the third point. Okay. All right, so I will read from the third point. Third point. Just as man is an example in miniature of the greater world, in Surah Al-Fatiha a shining example of the Quran of mighty stature, so are the prescribed prayers a comprehensive, luminous index of all varieties of worship, and a sacred map pointing to all the shades of worship of all the classes of creatures. Just as man is an example in miniature of the greater world in Surah Al-Fatiha, a shining sample of the Quran of mighty stature, so are the prescribed prayers a comprehensive, luminous index of all varieties of worship, and a sacred map pointing to all the shades of worship of all the classes of creatures. So a short point, and I think we kind of sort of touched on this, the previous point, but again, he's emphasizing that man is an index of all other creatures, and by being an index, he's indexing their qualities. Like he is an index to the qualities that manifest on all other things in this world. And how he knows that is that he can know all things in this world, or he can appreciate all things in this world. Doesn't have to be, educated, can be quote unquote uneducated or illiterate, but he can recognize and appreciate and comprehend all things in this world. So, and he gives the example that, you see this, let's say in the Quran too, one chapter, Surah Al-Fatiha, can be just an index of the Quran, or a summation, the essence. Just like any book, there's an index that essentially, or maybe like how should I say, like a chapter or a summary that brings all the points together in a very concise manner. Prayers are the same way. The prescribed prayers, in that they reflect the worship of all varieties, whether it's worship of the body, or worship of the tongue, worship of the soul, the worship, or in other words, the recognition by all their creatures. They also, in a way, in their own way, plea or ask from their divine source for their own sustenance. Whether it's the environment around you, other creatures, animate or inanimate, they also desire to be sustained. And man can sort of speak on their behalf in his own prayer. Again, with, tongue, so words, the soul, and the body. And a sacred map pointing to all the shades of worship of all the classes of creatures. So again, being an index and being able to reflect within him from the previous point, faults or impotence and poverty and neediness of all creatures of all types in this world. I think maybe a practical example would be, as much as I need life or I need consciousness, so too does another individual, another human being. And so too does somebody old or young or a child. And so too does any plant, animal, or insect. And so too does, what we would consider quote unquote inanimate, but inanimate in the sense that they don't act like man or act like other creatures, but who's to say, let's say water or the air or the clouds or the earth aren't in need as well. They too, because all classes of creatures are fundamentally the same, essentially. So does anybody have any thoughts on the third point? Awesome, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So in this third point, I'm also trying to understand a little bit more. It shows to me like all the, the worship aspect of the human being is like a wholesome, like all encompassing kind of worship that covers each and every individual. I mean, I like the three analogies that the author kind of points it very briefly, but I think it has a huge kind of implications on, for example, he says man is an example of the whole world, the greater world or the universe. So, I mean, can you imagine this? Like a man himself possesses all those qualities that you see in the whole universe. A simple man, just like, and then similar to how Surah Al-Fatiha in the Quran is said to be an example of the whole Quran of mighty. So whatever is the meaning of, or how the message that is in Surah Al-Fatiha represents everything that the whole Quran, what the whole Quran represents. And based on that, he says the prescribed prayers, which is a comprehensive, and as you explained, the index, luminous index of all varieties of worship. So all varieties of worship is what I'm trying to see, with that comprehensive and wholesome, as I'm seeing that, how the humans prescribed prayers becomes, is inclusive and makes it all purposeful, includes the worship of all and everything around me. So just like the man is a sample of the whole universe, I can be the representative of all the worships, because I understand that, as you mentioned about being the index and the map, I can comprehend, I can make sense of whatever is going on in the universe and see that everything is in their existence, glorifying and praising the one who gives them the way they are behaving. And a human being is able to understand, their worship in a sense. And that is when the human being stands in humility in front of his Lord, with that awareness, with that consciousness, how he can embody the worship of every other being, all sorts of worship, all classes of creatures.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to the previous point, I think it relates to consciousness or being aware that your prayer, like when you pray, you're not just praying on your own behalf, but praying as a representation of all other things, and keeping that in mind and keeping that in one's awareness. So, within you, you are aware that just as you have needs, so too do all other individuals, and so too do all other creatures. Similar needs, maybe not the exact same on a, you know, tangible level or a material level, but they're all fundamentally the same. All things need existence or sustenance. All things need attention. All things need to be made in a wise and just manner. That's what everything desires. All things desire, um, you know, uh, mercy and compassion. All things desire um, eternity, or to not go into non-existence. And I think recognizing that, changes your viewpoint of what prayer is. Rather than transactional between one party and another, but it is a communication between the entirety of creation through you back to its source. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts or comments on that or questions. Okay. I think we have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if we want to start the fourth point. I can maybe, sure, I can read maybe the first paragraph of the fourth point. So the fourth point, the second hand, minute hand, hour hand, and day hand of a clock, which tells the weeks look to one another. So the second hand, minute hand, hour hand, and day hand of a clock tells the weeks, which tells the weeks look to a clock, which tells the weeks look to one another, are examples of one another, and follow one another. Similarly, the alterations of day and night, which are like the seconds of this world, a vast clock of Almighty God, and the years which tell its minutes, and the stages of man's lifespan which tell the hours, and the epochs of the world's lifespan which tell the days, look to one another, are examples of one another, resemble one another, and recall one another. So here, before going into a description of the five prayers, he's sort of laying out how he's, in a way, essentially how he sees prayers, in that not only do they span across, let's say, space, so to speak. So I'm connected to other things through space in a moment, but I'm also connected to things through time, so across moments. So there's like two axes at play here, and it works in the same way, in the sense that just as man represents all of the things, so too, like concentric circles, the second, minute, hour, and day, they're all essentially interrelated. You can't speak about one without speaking about something else. Like if you talk about a day, you're talking about the hours, and you're talking about hours, you're talking about minutes, and you're talking about minutes, you're talking about seconds, and in reverse as well. Likewise, the same way, the world. If you are talking about day and night, you are talking about years. And if you're talking about years as it pertains to man, you're talking about decades. And if you're talking about decades and centuries, you're talking about epochs. They are all interrelated. So in a sense, he's laying out the fact that prayer spans both space and time, which is, to me, I appreciate that. Rather unorthodox, because it's not something one would commonly hear. But again, if you see prayer as connecting to a divine source, coming from a divine source, and therefore connecting to a divine source, and that source, it must be beyond space and time, you realize then your prayer is also must be beyond space and time. In other words, it encompasses all space and time. I mean, that's the aspiration, or the ideal. Would any people have any thoughts on the first paragraph? I don't know if we have time to keep going, but any thoughts on this before we wrap up? Okay, I guess next week then pick up from there as he goes through the prayers and what, how he sees them representing that sort of map he's made. Or okay, so unless there are any closing comments or hands, I'll close. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.